So we used to think of the middle class as a safe category. It was 40-hour work weeks, pensions, people who worked who were teachers, professors, lawyers even. And now it's a shakier category, and that's why I called it the middle precariat, as in precarious. Now to be middle class, you might not be able to have a summer holiday. You might not be able to own your home. You certainly wouldn't have 2 cars. And what interests me is also we had this idea of the middle class as this solid thing, and now it's a shaky thing. We also had this idea in the middle of the 20th century of it as a humdrum, boring thing that we wanted to escape, kind of like Revolutionary Road, Richard Yates. And now it's like everyone just wants to get into it, into the dream, the American dream of the middle class that's now so unstable, right? So one of the things that happened was unions weakened. It used to be that 30% of employees were in unions in the 60s, and now it's 7% in the private sector. And that's a pretty huge drop-off. And at the same time, you're seeing a lot of workforce become gigified or turn into freelance, contingent, et cetera, not stable, not with healthcare, not with the promise of security and long-term employment. There's other reasons why the middle class has been under siege. One is the concentration of wealth. You see the rise of the 1%, the rise of the wealthiest. Since 1997, the income of the top 1% has grown 20 times the rest of us. They're an ownership class, so they tend to own many of the corporations that are, say, creating the Uber economy, are hiring people to drive part-time, or the companies which employ people at hours, which mean that they can't take care of their children, hours in the middle of the night or odd hours in the early morning. And so I write about that in my book. So that kind of wealth concentration, it also empowers people to have multiple addresses and to not really invest in their neighborhoods. The fact that they're able to pay so much more than the rest of us for houses and apartments raises the rents and the cost of home ownership astronomically in fashionable cities. Another one was 1% TV, to describe people who, including myself, who watch shows like Billions or Downton Abbey or even Mad Men that sort of extol the wealthiest, kind of ethically challenged wealthy people. So there's something about 1% television that I find pretty harmful, in that we are asked to identify, and we do identify, with the very richest in this country rather than middle class people or struggling people. And that does show our ethical problems in a kind of clique lights, as it were. And I think one of the things that 1% television does is it makes a case for the deserving ultra-rich. Like, these are people who are brilliant or talented, like a show like Empire with a hip-hop mogul. They could have terrible, terrible values, but they work hard and they have some kind of genius, so they deserve to have this excess and this wealth and be drinking champagne out of flutes. A lot of reality television shows work on the same principle. Of course, what exactly they're doing that makes them deserving is always questionable, but the shows are making an argument that, yes, they are the deserving ultra-rich. And in fact, our president, I think, is very much a product of 1% television. If we think about The Apprentice, which I think started in 2004, and that was sort of venerating this kind of empty wealth and harsh, edicts to employees. You're fired, and that in itself was the beginning, I think, of kind of venerating that wealth without any criticism on reality television. So my book is very much about a divided society where we're just not in touch with one another. And one of the drivers of that is something I don't really write about, but I work on in the organization I run, called the Economic Hardship Reporting Project. And that's spatial inequality, which is that people in cities and in rural areas and all kinds of places are very divided from each other by class, that it's very stratified. And so you're very unlikely now to run into people from different walks of life in big cities. You're far less likely than you were in the past. I'm optimistic in certain ways because I've started having conversations with people, partially around the book, about self-blame, about them saying to themselves, what's wrong with me, and feeling stigmatized. And I feel like if this book achieves anything, or these conversations achieve anything, it's de-shaming people scrambling to stay in the middle class, saying it's not your fault, this is happening to other people. You know, the job numbers may look like they're up, but first of all, you know, that they often speak to how many jobs people are having, multiple jobs, which is not a great state of affairs for a lot of people. People now have more jobs. Each person has more jobs than they did in 2016, like individuals. So it's up by 2% or something like that. So, you know, it's substantial, and that's but you can be looking at these job announcements and you could be thinking, what's wrong with me? Why can't I figure it out? Why can't I get that second or third gig? But the point is, why should we have to have all these side hustles, you know? Why should we have to have second acts when we're 42? And so I'm optimistic that the conversations people can have can start to bring about self-awareness, solidarity, a better sense of themselves. And I've already heard from people saying, you know, I read your book and it said no stigma, and I told my husband when he couldn't get his second assignment, you know, as a freelancer, his second job, not his first job, no stigma. And to me, that could be just at least instead of a gloomy revolution, which, as I write, like a kind of emotional mini revolution where people talk more honestly about their situation.